Hi, Happy New Year to everybody. Happy and at the same time, good afternoon, good morning, good night, depending on where in the world you are. And welcome to our first test automation meetup for the year. And without further ado, I'll introduce myself. And we have two wonderful speakers, and I'll bring them to you and stuff like that. So if you have, just for it to be clear, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, you could put them in the chat, and I will ask them as they go along, or I will mount them up and ask at the end of the presentation so that everybody could get the questions heard. So without further ado, my name is Larry Goddard. I'm a test automation architect. I'm also the creator of Classy.js. And I am also the co-author of a beautiful book called Enhanced Test Automation with WebDriver IO. And here it is. If you haven't gotten your copy yet, reach out, get one. It was really be good. It teaches in here all the good stuff of how to become. It actually teaches you to become an automation engineer. You can learn a lot of things in here. It covers a lot of things, including how to handle errors and work in a CI/CD environment as well. So on today's meetup, we have Kristin Jackvony, if I pronounce it correctly or wrong, she will correct me later on. And we have Paul Grossman. So they are two very good speakers. Kristin will talk about about configuring Playwright for test automation success, and Paul will then give his beautiful insight in tips and tricks of low code testing tools using AI. So, and that is, and well, because we now start, and this is the first for the year, we have a lot of these throughout the year. We have them bi-monthly. So you could put that in a calendar. We have them bi-monthly, and we bring in different speakers with a great knowledge on everything tech, and for you all. And and like I say, if you have any questions, you could put them in the chat, or you could email them directly, and we will get them answered for you after the fact. And the other good thing is, I think so. Now, I would say so. Kristin, what could say with Kristin? So Kristin, here we have a speaker. First speaker will be Kristin, and she's a principal engineer for test automation, for software testing at Paylocity. She's the author of two books. One, The Complete Software Tester, and two, The Logical Facilities for Testers. And she is the creator of two courses, Postman Essential Training and Monday Morning Automation. And she blogs very regular on her site called thinkingtester.com. So where is Kristin? Kristin, are you there? There you are. And there you are, Kristin. Did I get your name correctly?
Oh, very close. Jackvony.
Vony. Okay, there you go. I stand corrected. Yeah, so that's lovely. So, Kristin, I know this is a Happy New Year to you. And
Happy New Year to you.
Yes, Happy New Year to you and everything. So it's good to have you. And I know you have a very good session here for our audience. So just one question before I let you go. As the question comes on, would you like me to read them to you, or you want to wait until the end of your presentation and then take questions?
I think if the questions come up, you can read them during my presentation, because I think we'll have enough time for that. And then we will also have time at the end too.
Okay, beautiful. So you heard it, folks. So you have a question, put it in the chat, and we'll get Kristin to answer them as we go along. So without further ado, over to you, Kristin.
All right. Well, let me start by sharing my screen. Okay. So in just a minute, you should see my PowerPoint. I'm not seeing it. Okay, there it is. All right. Hopefully you are all seeing it now too. Okay, so let me know if you are not seeing the screen, and we will get started. So thank you very much for that introduction, Larry. I am excited to talk to you about configuring Playwright for test automation success. And so as Larry mentioned, I am the author of 2 books, The Complete Software Tester and Logical Fallacies for Testers. The Complete Software Tester is a book that is designed to help beginning and mid-level testers get up to speed on all different kinds of testing, including manual testing, writing test automation, API testing, security testing. It's really meant to be the complete picture. And then my book, Logical Fallacies for Testers, is a tiny little book that you could read in one weekend. And it's all about what logical fallacies are and how you can apply them when you are thinking about your software testing. So I'm the creator of 2 courses, Monday Morning Automation on YouTube and Postman Essential Training on LinkedIn Learning. Monday Morning Automation is a completely free course, and it is designed to help testers from the very, very beginning who know nothing about test automation at all. It's to help them get started. There's about, I think, 53 lessons. Each of them are very short, only about 10 minutes. And it just really helps you get up to speed, and it's completely free. And then Postman Essential Training is a LinkedIn Learning course, and that teaches you all about API testing, how to set up API testing, what to test, and so on. So, and as Larry mentioned, my blog is called Think Like a Tester, which you can find at thinkingtester.com. And in my day job, I am the Principal Engineer 3 for software testing at Paylocity. And in that job, it is my responsibility to work with all of the different software teams and help them adopt good quality processes for all different kinds of testing. So here's our agenda for today. First of all, we will be talking about why Playwright. Why would we want to be using Playwright for our API and UI automation? And then we'll talk about the 4 different sections of the Playwright config file. And after that, we will learn about the most common features in each section. And then we will look at some examples of how you can configure projects in that config file to maximize your test effectiveness. So let's get started. First of all, why Playwright? Why might you want to use Playwright for your automated testing? Well, here are many popular reasons. It doesn't need a browser driver like Selenium WebDriver does. I've always found it really irritating when I'm using WebDriver. It seems like every other day it says, oh, sorry, your browser driver's out of date. Please update it. So I really like that Playwright works directly in the browser, so I don't need to install a driver. Playwright supports both API and UI testing. I am a huge proponent of API testing. I love that API tests are faster and more reliable than UI tests. So I'm really glad that it supports both right out of the box. Playwright supports all kinds of browsers, including Chromium-based browsers like Chrome and Edge, WebKit, which is Safari, and Firefox. It also supports mobile browser testing. This is not mobile native testing. This is when you have your application that works directly in the mobile browser. It supports that. It will emulate various mobile devices and screen sizes. It easily switches to iframes, tabs, and other browser windows, which we have found is a drawback of Cypress. There are ways to do that in Cypress, but they're not native and they can sometimes take a little configuring. But Playwright does those things right out of the box. Playwright supports intercepting and mocking API requests, which is super useful if you want to simulate, for example, getting a 500 error, and you might not be able to do that with the real API without taking your system down. Or if you are creating UI tests that are going to be built upon an API that hasn't been built yet, intercepting and mocking is really, really useful. Playwright also comes with many debugging tools. So if you are having a problem with your test, you can use several different methods to try and debug the problem. And finally, Playwright supports JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Java, and C#. So it is extremely versatile in terms of programming languages. So another great thing about Playwright is that it is extremely configurable. You can set up your tests to run in lots of different ways. And you do that through the configuration file, playwright.config. But the configuration file can be intimidating just simply because of all of the different types of options that it offers. So what you see on the right, and it's very, very small, you don't have to be able to read it right now. I just wanted to show exactly what the whole config file looks like when you first spin up a Playwright project. So you'll get this Playwright config file. By default, there's 79 lines of code in it, and many of those lines are commented out. And in some of the comments, you'll be able to sort of figure out what it is that that configuration setting will do. But in other times, it's a little confusing. So I thought it would be a good idea to just take a really deep dive into the Playwright config file to show everybody how it's structured, what you can put in there, how the settings work, and how you can configure it to really make it work for you. It is actually possible to run Playwright tests without a config file. I tried this out in preparation for this presentation. What I did was I created a simple Playwright project, and I just deleted the config file altogether. And then I went to run the tests, and the tests did run. They just ran with a whole bunch of defaults. But it is much, much better to learn how to use a config file and customize it to your advantage. So here are the 4 sections of Playwright config. First, there's the test configuration section, which has some general instructions for test execution. Then there's the use section that contains configuration settings for the tests. Then there's the project section, which is configuration settings for specific projects. And we will be talking about that word project and what it means in the context of Playwright. And then finally, there's the web server section, which includes instructions on how to start the development environment locally. So let's look at each one of these sections one at a time. So first, there is the test configuration section. These are the general settings. And there are many, many settings that you can configure in this section. And what I have included here are just the most popular ones. So we'll go through this little chart here, and I will show you what the configuration setting is named, what the definition is, and then what the default value is for the setting. So first we have the test dir configuration. So that stands for test directory. This points Playwright to the directory where your tests are located. By default, that's the tests file. But if you wanted to change that directory, if you wanted to have your tests named differently, all you would have to do is just change your configuration setting to point to the folder where you want Playwright to find your tests. Next, we have the forbid only configuration. So this is an interesting setting that you can use in Playwright, and here's how it works. Let's imagine that you have a bunch of Playwright tests, and one of them is failing, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So you want to just run that test. You can set that test to be the only test that runs. So what you do is next to where it says test, on that particular test, you just add .only. And then that test will be the only one to run when you run the npx playwright test command. So that's a really useful feature But if you accidentally leave that .only setting in there and then you commit your code, then when your tests are running in your CI environment, they'll only be running one test. So this forbid only setting, which you can see over here on the left, what it's set to right here is it's saying if you're using the CI environment and Playwright finds that .only setting, it will fail the build so that you won't accidentally be only running one test with every run and thinking that everything is great when you're just running one test. So that's very useful. Our next configuration setting is the fully parallel setting. And in order to understand this, we need to think about how Playwright runs the files by default. So in Playwright, the default setting is the tests will run in parallel, but just one at a time in a file. So let's say if you had file A and file B, and each of those files had 5 tests in them. When you started up the test project, by default, it would run the first test in file A and the first test in file B at the same time. But it wouldn't start up test 2 until test 1 had finished. But you can set the configuration to be fully parallel, which means that it's going to run as many tests as it can in parallel. So with file A and file B, if you had 5 workers to run the tests, it might start up tests 1, 2, and 3 in file A and tests 1 and 2 in file B and run those all at the same time. So that brings us to the workers setting. So the workers are what actually runs the tests, like what kind of server is actually running those automated tests. And the definition of the worker setting is the maximum number of workers that will run your parallel tests. By default, that is 50% of the number of cores on your machine, which is kind of interesting. I think when I ran the test on my machine, and I have a Mac, I believe it was 5 parallels. It might have been 6 parallels by default. But you can set this to whatever makes the most sense for your local device and for your CI environment. So if you have, let's say, 6 workers set, and you've got that file A and file B that each has 5 tests in them, what will happen is the workers will start tests 1, 2, and 3 in file A, tests 1, 2, and 3 in file B. So you will have 6 tests running all at the same time. So next we have the retries setting. That's the number of retries for a failed test. So by default, that's 0. So that means if your test fails, it fails. But you can set it to have 1 retry, 2 retries, as many retries as you want. So that if you are using a flaky environment and you think, well, maybe it just failed because the environment flaked out, you can retry that test. And you can see over here on the left for retries right here, I've got it set in this particular line so that if it's the CI environment, it's going to retry twice. But if I'm running it locally, then it's not going to retry at all. So next we have the reporter. So that's the reporter to use when reporting test passes and failures. And Playwright is so great because it has 7 different types of reporters built in, and we will be talking about that in the next slide. So the default reporter in Playwright is list, and you can and actually you can see over here I've set HTML to be the reporter in this particular configuration. And so we'll talk about what those things mean in the next slide. So then we have the timeout setting, and that is how much time to allow for a test before it fails because it took too long. The default value is 30 seconds, and that is set in milliseconds. So you can see over here, I have set the timeout to not be the default. I've set it to be 60 seconds. So let's just look a little over here at some of my other settings. We already went through some of them, but you can see the test directory right here. We talked about fully parallel. Here I've set that to true. We already talked about forbid only. And then for retries, I've got it set to 2 for the CI environment and 0 for running locally. And then for workers right now, I've got it set to just 1 worker for the CI environment and undefined for locally. And when it's undefined, that means it's just going to use the default number, 50% of the number of cores on your machine. And then I've got my HTML reporter set, and then I've got my timeout of 60 seconds set. So let's take a look at the reporters that are built in with Playwright. As I mentioned, there are 7 different reporters. The default one is the list reporter. And what that does is it just lists the tests in the command line and indicates for each test which ones have passed and which ones have failed. So it will include the name of the test and then pass or fail, and then the name of the next test and then pass or fail. So then there's the line reporter. This is a little more brief than the list reporter. In the line reporter, it displays only the count of passing and failing tests in the command line. So if you had 10 tests and 8 of them passed and 2 of them failed, it would just say 8 passes, 2 failures. And then if you want to get even more simple, there's the dot reporter. The dot reporter displays a dot for each passed test and the letter F for each failed test. So you can imagine if you had a couple hundred tests, you might not want to be filling up your command line with lots of information about what passed and what failed. You might just want to see just a little dot for each passed test and only an F for the failed test. And then that way, those Fs will jump out at you very quickly so you can see how many are failing. So then there's the HTML reporter, which is my personal favorite. This generates an HTML report. And each test in the report is clickable and it shows additional details about the test. So over here on the left, we've got the HTML report. And so this was a reporter that spun up after I ran my simple sample tests that I was creating in preparation for this presentation. So you can see up here on the top right that I had 6 tests that were run. I had 6 that passed, 0 failed, 0 flaky, and 1 test was skipped. And then here you can see the list of each test that was run with its name. You can see the check mark that shows that it passed. You can see what browser it ran on. This is the Chromium headless browser. And then you can also click through on each of these tests and get more information, depending on what was recorded during the test. And we will talk about recording tests a little later on in another config section. So this is super useful. When you click on it, it will provide you more information. It's especially useful if your test is failing. You can find out exactly where it went wrong. So then we have some other reporters. We've got a blob reporter, which generates a zip file that can be read with a JavaScript file reader. Then there's the JSON report. You can create the JSON report in the command line, or if you specify the name of a file, it will create the JSON report for you in that file. Same thing with JUnit. That creates a JUnit XML report. It creates it in the command line or in the XML file. Okay, next we are going to go on to the use section. So the use section is comprised of 5 different configuration types, and we will go through each one. First, we have the base URL and the storage state. So the base URL line sets the base URL for the tests. So you can see right here on the left, I've got base URL set to this URL. What that means is when you are writing your tests, you can assume that Playwright knows what the base URL is because it's set in the config file. So you don't have to type in every single one of your tests 127.0.0.1:3000. You can just navigate to the page that you want to run the test. So if you were going to a customers page, you would just navigate to /customers, and Playwright would know to populate that base URL first. Then there's the storage state configuration. And basically what that looks like is it points to a file in your complete Playwright project. And that file is where you might store your cookies or your tokens for your authentication. So if you have a test step that runs that authenticates a user and gets a cookie or a token back, you can save that cookie or token in that file. And then you can say, I want the storage state to point to this file. And then Playwright knows to automatically read from that file to get the authentication, which saves you time when you are running your tests because you're already logged in. So the next section of the use section is emulation options. And this is for setting device options such as screen size or locale or time zone. So this is really good for if you are testing an application that maybe shows something different depending on the locale. You could set your locale and then your test will automatically, when you go to that browser, it's automatically going to have that locale set for you. So right here on the left, I've got locale and I have set it to English and US. So then we have the network options. So these are options for ignoring HTTPS errors, using proxy settings, and accepting downloads. So here on the left, I have one example. I've got accept downloads set to true. So this would be useful if you are testing a web application that has an automatic download of a file. What you're doing here is you're telling Playwright, I want to accept the download that's going to happen automatically so I can continue using it in my test. Then we have the recording options. So these are the options for how the tests will be recorded. We will be talking about this more in detail in the next slide because this is a super useful feature. And then finally, we have the browser and action timeout. So these settings are for what browser to use by default, and then also what timeout to set for actions. Things like a click. You might set an action timeout so that if you are doing a click in your test and there's no response to the click within 2 seconds, your test fails. And for the default browser here, I've set browser name to be Firefox. That means unless there's any kind of override in the project section, which we will be talking about later, automatically it's going to use Firefox as the browser because I've set it here. So now let's talk about the recording options. So like I said, these recording options are super useful, especially in debugging. And there's 3 different kinds of recording options. So first we have the screenshot. So what that does is it takes a screenshot of the last event in the test and it saves it in the test results folder. And by default, this feature is off because it just, it uses file space if you are using the feature. So they want to have it turned off by default. And the options for this screenshot are off or on, which means every single test you run, it's going to take a screenshot of the last event. And then there's this only on failure option. So what that does is if the test is running and it fails, then it takes a screenshot and saves it. If the test passes, it does not. So next we have the trace recording. And the trace is like a GUI viewer where you can see everything that's happening in the test. You can see what's on the screen of the browser as the test is running. And then you can also see things like which test step is being run. And you can also see things like what kind of errors are coming back from the console or what kind of logging is coming back. So it's extremely useful. And so what this does is it saves the trace of the test in the test results folder. And then you can refer to it later, open it up and see what's going on. By default, that's off, but the options for that are off, on, retain on failure. So what that means is it's going to record the trace while you're running the test. But if the test passes, it's just going to delete everything because it knows you don't need it. But if the test fails, it's going to save it, and then you can refer to it in the test results folder. And then there's also a setting called on first retry. So that means if you have retries set up and your test fails, and then the retry starts, it's going to start recording the trace on that retry. It's not going to do it the first time the test runs, but it will record on the retry. And then finally, we have the video recording option. So what this does is it saves a video of the test in the test results folder. Again, that's off by default because it's just going to be saving file space and saving computing time by not being on. You can have it set to off or on or retain on failure, just like with the trace. So it's not going to, it's going to record, but if the test passes, it will delete the recording. If the test fails, it will save it in the test results folder. Or you can have it set to on first retry, where it's not going to record the first time, but if the test fails and it's on a retry, then it will record. So you can see up here, this is what the configuration settings would look like, depending on what you chose. So right now I have chosen screenshot to be on. So that's going to take a screenshot with every single test. I've got trace set to retain on failure. So it's only going to save the trace if my test fails. And then I've also got it set to video. So it's going to take a video on the retry. Okay, so now we come to the most exciting part of the configuration file, and that is the projects part. So when I first started using Playwright, I was a little bit confused about the concept of project. When I heard someone referring to Playwright projects, I assumed that meant like the entire set of test automation code. You know, just like when you create software for a new application, you would call that a project. But project actually means something different in Playwright. What it means is a logical group of tests running with the same configuration. So you can set up a whole bunch of different kinds of projects in your test project, and then you can run only the projects that you want or that you need. So you can run your tests on all projects by using the npx playwright test command. It's just going to run everything. Or you can run just a very specific project or a specific set of projects, and you do that in the command line by using -- project. So here, if I said I want to just run my Chromium project, I would type npx playwright test and then -- project equals Chromium. There are many, many ways to configure projects, which is why they are so exciting. You can set what browser you want to use, generic browser, branded browser, mobile browser. You can configure the base URL so that it's different in each different project. You can set the number of retries so that they can be different in each project. You can set the timeout amounts. You can set which files you want to run and not run in your projects. And you can do that using the test match command or the test ignore command. So test match says, please match all of these files and run them. Test ignore is please ignore these files and don't run them. You can also set dependencies, which are projects that need to run before or after the project. And we will be talking about that in just a minute. So these are what the projects look like here on the left. You can see I've got 3 projects. One is called Chromium, one is called Firefox, and one is called WebKit. And for each one, I've got some different settings. I've got a different kind of browser that I'm using for each one. I've got, on this project, I want to ignore this test file right here. I'm saying don't run that one in this project. Here in my Firefox project, I've set, I want to have 1 retry for every failed test. Here in my WebKit project, I've set a test timeout that's longer than the other ones. It's going to be 90 seconds instead of the default 30. So it's important to note that projects, the settings in a project will override the settings in the main section of Playwright config. So let's take a look at this example here. We've got a project called Firefox, and in my Firefox project, I've set the timeout to be 90 seconds. The default timeout for all of my tests is 60 seconds. So if I were running all of my tests and not the specific project, the timeout would be 60 seconds. But if I'm running this specific project, the Firefox project, the timeout here would be 90 seconds. So it's going to override the general settings. And now let's take a look at dependencies. So it's possible to set one project to be dependent upon another project running first. So in this example right here, I've got a project that I'm calling setup. And you can see that my test match is looking for this auth.setup.ts file, which is where I have my authentication steps. And here in my Chromium project, I have set setup to be a dependency of this project. So what that means is when I start up the Chromium project, it's going to say, oh, this depends on the setup project, so we'd better run that first. Additionally, you can also set up a teardown project. So I've got a project here called cleanup, and the test match is delete.ts. So that's going to be the file that I run just to clean up all of my test data. So because I've configured that right here as the teardown project, then Playwright knows that after my tests run with this setup project, that then it's going to call the cleanup project. So what that looks like is this. Let's say I want to run my Chromium project. I would say npx playwright test -- project equals Chromium. And then when the Chromium project starts, it sees, oh, we got to be dependent upon the setup project. So it goes up here to the setup project. It runs the setup project. Then it runs the Chromium tests. And then it goes back and sees, oh, we've got to do a cleanup project. It goes to the cleanup project and it runs that. Very, very useful. Okay, and now we come to the final section of the Playwright config file, and that is the web server section. So this section contains instructions about how to start the development environment locally in order to run your tests against it. So this is super useful if you or your developer are making changes in the product code locally and you want to run your tests against that locally running code to make sure that you haven't broken anything. So what happens is when you start your Playwright tests, if it sees that there are instructions here in the web server section, it will start up the project. So the command instruction is the command that is used to start the server. Often, especially in JavaScript, that would be npm run start. And then the URL is what gets returned once the server has started up. This setting here, reuse existing server, is useful because if it's set to true, what it does is when you go and you run the test command again, if Playwright sees that the server is already running, it's not going to kill the server and start it up again. It's going to say, oh, it's already running. I don't need to do anything. And then finally, the timeout setting tells Playwright how long to wait for the process to start up. So after 30 seconds here, it's going to give up and it's going to say something was wrong in starting the project. So let's put it all together. Let's see what it looks like when you have an entire Playwright config file. Now, what I've done here so that we could actually read the text is I've broken it up into 2 columns. But you can imagine that the section here in the second column would really be underneath the first column. So the very first thing in a Playwright config file is this import statement. So you want to import define config and devices from the Playwright test package. The next thing is the export default define config statement. And you can see our opening braces right here, and then our closing braces right here. So in between those braces are the 4 sections that we learned about. So first, there's the general section, and we'll just go through these, do a little review here. We've got our test directory, where to find the tests. I've got fully parallel set to true because I want my tests to run really fast, so I'm going to use a bunch of parallels. I've got my retries. set so that it's going to retry once if I'm in my CI environment and no times if I'm running locally. I'm using the list reporter, and I've set the timeout to 60 seconds. So then we have our use section. In my use section, I have set the base URL, and then I've just set the trace recorder to on first retry. So when I'm running in my CI environment, if I need to retry a test, it's going to record the trace for me. Then I can go back and I can say, well, what went wrong with this test? And I can look at the trace to find out. So then we have the project section. For simplicity here, I've just set up 2 projects. One is the setup project, which is going to do my authentication. And then I have a Chromium project, which is going to run all of the tests on the headless Chromium browser. And then finally, I have the web server section, which is commanding how it's going to start up the web server to run locally. There's my URL that I'm expecting, and I want to reuse the existing server if it's set to true, which it is right here. So that's what it looks like all together. So now let's get into 3 different project configuration strategies. So you can set up your projects however you want to now that you understand all the different ways to configure them. And you could even use all 3 of these strategies in your entire Playwright code if you wanted to, or you could just pick one. So 3 common configuration strategies would be browser type. You could set your projects to run by Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or you could use a test type configuration where you've organized your projects by smoke or regression or feature. Or you could organize your projects by environment type, such as QA or stage or production. So we will look at one of these one at a time. We'll talk about why you might want to use that strategy, and then we'll take a look at what that strategy would look like. So first, the browser type configuration. So the browser type configuration is useful for when you have a heavy UI application. You have a lot of different things going on in the UI. You want to make sure that it's going to work on a number of different browsers. You might even have your application working on mobile browsers, so you would want to check to make sure that it was going to work on different mobile devices. So what would that look like? Well, here's a whole bunch of projects that I set with the browser type configuration. We start over here with the headless Chromium browser. So I've just named that project Chromium, and I've just said when we run the tests, we're going to use that Chromium browser. And then I have 4 different other browser types. I have the not headless Chrome browser, so I'm using the actual branded Chrome browser. And then here I'm using Edge. Here I'm using Firefox. Here I'm using Safari. So if I were to run all of these projects, I would be running all of my tests on all of those different browsers. But I've added more. I have added some mobile browsers. So you can see I've configured my tests in these projects to run on different emulations of the mobile browser. And these are all supported by Playwright. And I've just named them just what the name of the device is. I'm using some phones. I'm using some tablets. So we're going to get lots of different screen sizes here. So if I were to run all my projects in this particular Playwright project, if I said NPX Playwright test, then I would run every single one of my tests on every single one of these browsers, both web browsers and mobile browsers. So I would get a lot of information about how my UI was behaving. Then we have the test type configuration. So you might want to use this configuration when you have many, many tests, but you don't need to run them all with every test run. So for example, if you have 200 tests and your developer wants to deploy some code and they've checked in the code and the tests start up, but you've got 200 tests, they're going to have to wait a long time to get feedback. So you might want to specify running different tests at different times. So you might want to have smoke tests for fast feedback. So you would have a very small project that just had a few tests, and then you'll get feedback practically instantly. You could also use this if you have a specific regression suite that you want to run, depending on what feature has changed. So for example, if somebody made a change to the customer feature and you had a whole suite of customer tests to do a full regression, you would want to be able to just run those tests and not anything else. So let's see what that might look like. So here are some projects that I've set up, and I've got a smoke test project, a customer regression project, an inventory regression project, and then a full regression project. So for my smoke test project, I'm using the grep command to find the tests that I have tagged with smoke. And I will talk a little bit more about tagging in the next slide so you can see what that looks like. So this is going to run just my tests that I have tagged as smoke tests. So then I have a customer regression project set up here, and I've got it set to find anything that's been tagged with the customer tag. So if it's been tagged with a customer tag, we know it's part of the full customer regression suite. Same thing here for the inventory regression, only this time my tag is inventory. So that would run the whole inventory suite. And then for my full regression, you can see I'm not specifying any tests. So that means it's just going to run them all. And again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but to run a specific project, the way you do that is with npx playwright test -- project equals, and then the name of your project. So let's talk a little bit about test tagging. So here are a couple of sample tests. These are just tests that Playwright creates by default when you set up a new project. And so I've just practiced tagging them. In this particular test, I've tagged it with two tags. I've tagged it as smoke and I've tagged it as customer. So this is a test that I want to run every time I need a suite of smoke tests, but maybe because it's related to the customer, which this really isn't because it's just a sample test, but let's pretend that it is really related to the customer. I also want to have it run with my full customer regression suite. So that's why I've given it two tags. And you just put them right there inside the test title. You can even, if you want to, you can put them at the beginning of the test title. And when you use that grep command, it will find them. And then here with this test, I've just tagged it with one tag, and that's inventory. You can tag a test with more than one tag, as you've seen right here. You can also create a project that looks for more than one tag. So you can use the grep command in your project configuration, and you can say, I want to look for smoke tests and use this vertical pipe. Also look for the inventory tests too. And then you can also set the project configuration to match specific test files. As I mentioned earlier, there's commands test match and test ignore. So in this case, I'm using test match, and I'm looking for anything that says smoke.spec.ts. So this could be like customer smoke, or it could be basic smoke, or whatever, but it's going to look for any files that have this regex match right here. So then we come to the environment type configuration for projects. So you might want to use this if you have tests that are going to be running in different environments, such as QA or stage or production. And each one of those environments will probably be using a different URL, because you use a different URL to get to the QA environment than you do to the production environment. You might also want to use this environment type configuration if your environments behave differently. For example, if one environment is slower than other environments. And you might also want to use it if you want to specify different tests for different environments. You might want to run more tests in one environment and fewer tests in another. So let's see what that might look like. So we've got 4 different projects here. We've got 2 that are QA projects where we are expecting to run in the QA environment. And you can see I don't have a base URL set here, and that's because I'm just going to use the default base URL that I set up in my use section of my configuration. So one project is called QA Chrome. I'm going to run those tests in the Chrome browser. And then I've got this project here called Firefox, where I'm going to be running in the Firefox browser. And for both of these projects, I've set the timeout to be 90 seconds because my QA environment is kind of slow. So I want to give the tests more time to respond before they fail. And then I've also, because my environment in QA can be a little flaky, I've set my retries to 2. So if the test fails, I'm going to try it 2 more times before we say, oh, nope, definitely that's failed. So then I have my stage environment right here, and you can see that my base URL is different. That's going to point to stage.example.com to get to the browser and my app to test. And in the stage environment, I've decided I don't really need to run every single test. I think I just like to run my smoke tests and then maybe also my customer tests because those have been flaky lately. So I'm going to set a complete customer regression here. So it's going to look for just those test tags and run those tests. And I'm going to set the timeout here to be 60 seconds because this environment, while slower than production, it's not quite as slow as my QA environment. And then I've got my production project set right here where I've got my base URL is set to my production URL, and I only want to run my smoke tests here because I don't want to put any load on production. I want some really fast feedback here, so I'm just going to run my smoke tests, and I don't need to have anything other than the default timeout of 30 seconds because the production environment is fast. I'm also not expecting much flakiness, so I haven't set any retries here. So this over here on the left is what it looks like to run more than one project in the same command. So let's imagine, I didn't put them here because there wasn't quite enough room, but let's imagine we have 3 QA projects. We've got QA Chrome, QA Firefox, and QA Edge. And I want to run all of my QA projects. Maybe I've set them to run overnight or first thing in the morning. What I would do here is npx playwright test, and then I would do -- project equals QA Chrome, -- project equals QA Edge, -- project equals QA Firefox. So it will start all 3 of those projects and run all of the tests. And that is all I have for you today. I'm looking forward to taking your questions. But before I do that, I just want to review all of the different ways that you can connect with me and connect with my products. So you can find my Think Like a Tester blog at thinkingtester.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you like, or on X. I post regularly on both of those. My book, The Complete Software Tester, is available on Amazon. That's available on both Kindle and in paperback. And remember, that's a book designed to help you get acquainted with all different types of testing, from API to security to performance to mobile and so on. My Logical Fallacies for Testers book is just a little book, 40 pages long. It's available on Kindle. It's a really quick read and a lot of fun. Then my Monday morning automation class is my free course on YouTube. And that is just 10-minute lessons, about 53 lessons that will teach you from the very beginning to be a writer of test automation. And then my Postman Essential training is on LinkedIn Learning, and that provides you with knowledge about how to set up API testing and what kinds of things you should be testing when you are testing APIs. All right, and that is all I have for you. So I will stop sharing and I will take any questions.
Hi, that was wonderful. That was brilliant, and I have a few people who want to thank you for such a clear explanation of what you all the thing that you went through. But before I jump into the questions, I actually have a question. You touch on a bit of everything, how easy it is to integrate Playwright into the CI/CD pipeline.
Okay. I will confess that I don't know a whole lot about that. And that is because there's another principal engineer that I work with who already for my company had set up that integration. So I don't have any experience with that, but I don't think he had any difficulty with that. And that might be something that you want to think about in your company, is to perhaps have one of your stronger automation engineers set up a project that others can clone and use. And then those configurations are all set up for them when they create their tests to run in the CI platform.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I have a question here from, I'm not good at pronouncing people's name, but I'll call him by his surname, by Mr. Wilson. He would like to know what advice would you advise having API and UI project in one code base in Playwright, given that the fact that it's supported?
Yes, I would advise that, definitely, because I think it's just much simpler to keep everything in one code base. I would also advise to keep your tests in the code base with the project code, with the actual application code, because then that way everyone on the team, from developers to testers, can understand what the tests are and contribute to them. They will know how to debug them if there's problems, and how to fix them, and how to contribute, add more tests. So how you would want to organize them would really depend on what you were using them for. I would, if I were running both the API and UI tests, I would probably have a separate folder for all of the API tests, and maybe even subfolders, depending on how much testing I was doing, maybe a subfolder for each endpoint. And then I would have a second folder, which would be for the UI test. So that would probably be like my first breakdown, would be one top folder for API, one top folder for UI. But something else that is really interesting to think about is that you can use API commands to set up your UI tests. That is really, really useful. It saves a lot of time. So you can imagine if you were, let's say, running a test where you needed to have a new customer, but the test wasn't about adding the new customer. The test was about using the new customer. Instead of having UI steps to add the customer, which is kind of slow and sometimes flaky, you could use those API commands and just say, I want to post a new customer to our customer database. And then from that API command, you can go on and you can use your UI tests. So that is another strong argument for keeping those tests in the same code project.
Oh, that's good, and I kind of agree with you 100% on that one. It's good to keep your test code inside the project. Sometimes it's not that feasible, but it's a good thing. And let's talk about environment configuration. How do you look at, is there a difference between having API tests in Playwright and the configuration files? Do you have to have something separate for APIs as well as UI, or it could be one thing?
Yeah, probably, yep. So if you were running API tests, you would probably have different URLs for different environments, depending on what environment you were in. So like if you're hitting the API in your QA environment, that's going to have a different URL than if you're hitting the API in the production environment. Something else that you can do, which I didn't get into here, was you can have environment files set up for different environments. So rather than setting the base URL in the config file, you could have the base URL set in an environment file. So you might have like qa.env or stage.env or production.env. And in that file, you could have the all of your different configuration settings where you say for the API, it's going to point to this URL when we're in QA. For the UI, it's going to point to this URL when we're in QA. And then when you set up your test, what you do is you set up to read from whatever environment file you should use. So in your project, you can say, in my production, this is my production project, and I want my production project to read from my prod.env file to get my values. So you could do that.
Oh, brilliant. And just to add for all our people out there listening, the video, the videos for this will be sent out on the Testomatic YouTube channel, as well as will come via email. So that's just to put that out there one time. Yeah, and I mean, Kristin, back to you. I mean, and is really good. So do you have any how to say this? How do you tell somebody who now is new to using Playwright? What advice you have for them? Coming into be a new person using Playwright from some other platform. What advice you have for them?
That is a great question. I found personally for me that learning Playwright was more difficult than learning Cypress, for example, which is what I was using before I switched to Playwright. Cypress was much more intuitive. Playwright, I had to think more like a developer. And so, oftentimes if I'm learning a new tool, what I do first is I download it and then I start just playing around with it a little bit. Maybe I look at the documentation. And for me, that wasn't enough to understand about Playwright. So I actually took a course. I took a Udemy Playwright course called Playwright from Zero to Hero. And that was really, really helpful because it presented the concepts that I needed to learn in a very systematic way, with examples that then built upon each other. So I guess my biggest piece of advice is if you want to learn Playwright, I would recommend finding a course and taking the course. It'll save you a lot of pain.
Interesting. I mean, it's just one of those things that you can't just jump into and read because it's let's say complicated more than most.
Yeah.
I mean, all good things, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So you said now, since you started using Playwright to do things, how do you find it cut down on the amount of work you have to do in relation to when you're using Cypress? And the follow-on questions as well, so you can answer them all in one go, is why did you make the change from Cypress to Playwright?
So at my company, we started to make the change from Cypress to Playwright because of some of the features that Playwright offers that Cypress does not, or doesn't offer out of the box. Things like being able to change to different tabs and to different browsers easily. Playwright offers just a lot more configurability. I think Cypress is made, and I'm still a big fan of Cypress, by the way. I mean, I think it's an excellent tool, especially for new test automation engineers. Cypress makes it easy for you to set up your tests and find your elements and things like that. But sometimes when things are made easier, that also means that constrictions are added, where you might not have as much freedom to maybe set how you want to navigate to an element or how you want to interact with the element. You might, I can't think of a specific example of this beyond just like the browsers and the tabs, but I think Playwright just offers a lot more freedom and flexibility. And then of course the project configuration offers a ton of freedom and flexibility, which is really great. So that's why we started to make that change. Not all of our teams are using it yet, but they do know that Playwright is available. And, we've started to set up projects that can be cloned and used and NPM packages that can be uploaded to help people get started. In terms of ease of use, just for my own personal use, I would say Cypress is easier. Cypress is easier to get started. But Playwright is much better for debugging, and it also just allows that more greater flexibility.
I mean, and just before and before we go and you have your final thought, I have one little small question is, in terms of everything that you have in using both Cypress, Playwright, and I'm sure you use others as well. And I heard you announce a lot of them. What are some of the advantages, just off the top of your head, of Playwright over any other one, for that matter of fact? Just some of the advantages.
Yeah, so I think the biggest advantages are, I mean, my favorite is that you don't need a browser driver. I hate the browser driver. I
Brilliant.
mean, maybe that's just me, but I really hate the
Brilliant.
browser driver. So I love being able to just run directly in the browser right out of the box. So that's a big thing. And then I think the other thing is all of the different ways that you can debug your tests, and also the different ways that you can run your tests. I've been using Playwright with Visual Studio Code, and there's a Visual Studio Code plugin that allows you to run the test just directly from that console, from the IDE. There's a section that you can go to called tests. And so you can just say, oh, I just want to run this test. And you just click the little play button and it runs. So you can run them that way. You can open up a whole GUI interface, just like you would see with Cypress. You can run them that way. There's just a lot of choices. And then for debugging, you can debug just the way you would like regular like production code. So you can set up a debug breakpoint. You can create log statements really easily, more easily than in Cypress. So that those I think are the biggest advantages.
All right, thanks for that, and thank you for being here and presenting. And I'm sure, and from the comments, a lot of people find it very, very useful. So they're saying thanks a lot for that. And yes, it was really lovely having you on. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And it was good. And maybe next time we could do this again, and you could extend what takes place with and give us some more insight into Playwright.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. And there we had the lovely Kristin, and she made it very easy and stuff for us to understand Playwright on a granular level. And now I have a friend of mine, and not just a friend of mine. He's my co-author in our book called Enhanced Test Automation WebDriver IO. With no further, Paul, he doesn't need much introduction because he has been around very long on the circuit, over 20 years. And he has worked with a lot of people and and a lot of things. So I will let Paul introduce himself. I'll bring Paul in and I'll let him introduce himself.
Am I on?
Hey, Paul, there you go.
Hey.
I was just talking about you.
Oh, yeah. I was a little engrossed in this book by Kristin, The Complete Software Tester. I have my own personal copy of it over here, making notes and following up on it. This is fantastic. By the way, this book is about 506 pages long, packed with sorts of stuff. I'm a little bit jealous because your book and my book is about, I think, 300. We're going to have to fix that. But yeah, I just want to throw those out there. Kristin is really fantastic. I've actually known her, I'd say probably about a year, but we actually have a friend in common that I've worked with back 7-8 years ago over at Redbox. And by the way, Redbox, although it technically isn't existing anymore, its parent company Coinstar still is doing great guns.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, like I say, very old guy. People, you can hear for yourself, very old guy. Some of the companies don't even exist anymore. I'll definitely get myself a copy of that book. I'll definitely have to get myself a copy. And I know if Kristin can still hear me, I think we'll look at, to as we say, we'll look at getting a signed copy. So it'll be really
that
cool.
would be awesome. Let's see if we can make that happen. We have to get some signed copy stuff together. Okay.
Yeah, so the idea here, folks, as you hear, is Paul, and today we'll hear from him and his great wisdom on. So he's going to give us some tips and tricks of low-code test tool using AI. Paul, the floor is yours.
All right. Let me. I'm going to get my screen up here. Let's go share my screen. I think that's the other important thing to do while I'm here. Let's do a share screen. I want the entire window, and I want this screen here, screen 2. And I want to drag this off over here. 1 second. It's always setting up. You never think about what you do, because I'm always, usually you or I are hosting and things are pretty easy. Let's go take a look at where I am, and I'm going to go and see if I can get this. We have a screen coming up. And
I can see that. I can see that. I
How
can see
about-
that.
All right. I think we are ready to go. All right. As everybody knows, or don't know, I'm Paul Grossman, the dark arts wizard of test automation. You can find me out there on Twitter, X, Twix, Exit, whatever you want to call it, and all sorts of other social media sites. Look me up. I just recently joined Substack over there, so you can find me over there, and also other social media sites out there. I'm going to be talking about tips and tricks of AI with low-code platforms. But if you are a developer, please stick around, because I actually am going to start off with some tips and tricks for AI on what's going to happen, what you can leverage. And some of that is actually relates back to Playwright, as Kristin was talking to. So actually almost any coded environment, you've got development environment. Okay, cool. Sorry, background things going on here. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm at thedarkartswizard@gmail.com. If you want to see my YouTube channels, Paul Grossman, The Dark Arts Wizard. Yes, it was 2 o'clock in the morning when I decided to come up with the longest custom link for YouTube, but I have enough followers. They said, here, have a custom URL, so you can find me out there, or just look for The Dark Arts Wizard. Any one of these things with this background over here with the gears is 99%. It's actually me. You can also hear a little bit more about me on the Automation Guild, the Automation Podcast with Joe Colantonio. It's don't have to memorize 103 over here as the link. This will take you to my very first one 10 years ago, but I am regularly on that conference at Halloween. So just go look for the one that appears at the end of October, or maybe the first week of November. You're going to hear me talk about all sorts of cool stuff and fun things. A little bit about me. As Larry and I have told you, we are the co-authors of Enhanced Test Automation with WebDriver.io. And it is a superhero-themed book. It shows you how to set up your utility belt to be really, really good. And we had a ton of fun putting it together for you guys. I've been working in test automation. It's going on 25 years now. 16 of those years I was working in Micro Focus with HP. That was VB script. I don't really brag about being able to automate with BASIC for 16 years, but I did pay the mortgage. So at least that's I'm just not cool when I do that. I've been working in low-code automation. We'll talk about that for about 4 years. Did Selenium Cucumber for about 3 years and WebDriver.io for about 2 years. And there's all sorts of different languages on that. I've worked in medical devices. I worked at Redbox and also in the mortgage industry, and all sorts of different tools, coded and codeless tools, including Test Rigger, Context QA, codeless testing with AI. That's with open text over there. So I bridged the gap on the whole thing, and I'm going to give you some good tips and tricks on what's going on with AI. A little bit about what we're going to be doing. I'm going to talk about ways AI can help test automation, both for developers and for manual testers, and how to train your AI, doing some coding standards, and also for manual testers, how to convert text documentation to a formatted syntax, how that works. I've got demos on here to show you off. And so I'm going to say, let's get started. If you have questions, jot them down into the into the chat. If you're on, you can go into comments if you are watching us from LinkedIn, or you can go into the chat if you're watching us from YouTube. And as Larry said, this will be re-recorded, available right after this this session. It'll be back up there, so you can watch it later. If you have to drop, that's okay. Doesn't hurt my feelings. You can watch us later. I'm always happy to be here. Let me get up here, show off my nice, cool dragon shirt, because this is the coolest thing ever. Let's see. So first thing I want to dispel one myth is that no, there's not going to be a Boston Dynamics robot dog that is going to become a software developer engineering test and is going to automate us out of a job. Let me give you my best example. Is way back in the day, they used to have pickaxes to tear up streets and concrete, but then they got the jackhammer, the air-driven powered jackhammer. And it didn't put the gold miners out of work. It just made their jobs easier. Take a look at Gold Rush. It's been running for a long time. The more technology increases, the more amazing things benefit. So it's just another tool in there. Don't be afraid of AI. It's perfectly fine. One thing is that my personal opinion is AI is like a gold mine that has 20% iron pyrite in it. So you need to be able to know what's fool's gold and what's real gold when you're looking at it. It is not something that will automatically do everything for you. The next thing, one thing I learned today, I learned the jackhammer invented 1893. I did not know that technology was that old. I figured it was somewhere in the 50s or the 40s. Yeah, been around quite a while. Next thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is what are some of the, there's generative AI out there which can generate steps and test cases and even build suites, description of test cases out there. There are a whole bunch out there that you can take a look at. And in fact, like I said, I always like to do live things. Find ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. You can take a look at. I'm going to go see if I can switch momentarily to my Slack or my browser over here, and I have quite a few tabs open over here. This actually I wanted to save for last. We've got, I'll do it in the right order here. Here is Claude. I like Claude. I was actually asking Claude to create something that is kind of obfuscated and hard to read. We'll talk a little bit about that later. I got ChatGPT over here, who is, let's see, who is Larry Goddard in test automation. And test automation, we'll do a live demo on that and see how well ChatGPT comes up. Maybe it knows. Not a widely recognized name in the field. That is not going to be very, very good. I'm going to go over to Gemini. Gemini also doesn't know who Larry and Kristin is. I don't think it's going to know who me is. But the interesting I'm saying here is, let's go over to Find. Find looks up Kristin and finds a lot of background and lots of sources out there. So as we are QA testers, I go and test everything. There are strengths and weaknesses among different AI tools out there. One that I can also mention, if you're not sure which tool you want to work with AI, you can check out u.com. And the cool thing about this is that it gives you all sorts of different models. GPT is out there, Claude is out there, Llama is out there, Minstrel, Gemini, Command R, Solar. I don't even know what Dolphin is, but this is actually a pretty cool thing. And by the way, one of the things I like to do in some of my slides is have, I'm a very creative guy. I went to an art school. And I also do use creative AI to do tests to create images. You can actually use a creative image over here to go and create images. So over that. And look at that. Boom. There's a nice AI. I could, in fact, what you're kind of seeing behind me is actually an AI generated picture background over there of a pool. That's kind of cool. So I do use it. And the cool thing is you can get the images and everything combined in there. Then there's Pi AI. I asked who is Kristin over there, and it gets this pretty right. This is pretty cool. The only thing is, this one I call the square-headed girlfriend or boyfriend, and because it always asks you questions, and some of them can be kind of invasive. It will also stroke your ego. So it's a fun little thing. It seems to be fairly intelligent on what it does, but all sorts of different things. But that's our current demo we're going to go with on that. Let me get back to our PowerPoint. A little walkthrough on that, of course. And of course, there's also Copilot. We'll talk about that out there. One of the main things is it used to be really helpful for me. I always said, don't be a lone ranger on projects. Don't be the only guy, because in that case, all your ideas are great ideas. There's no one to bounce ideas off of to get better ideas or get them shut down. And you're like, okay, there's something you're totally missing. That is, I'm sorry, Kristin is mentioning it's a pretty impressive individual. She's laughing at. Yeah, it's fun. It's something to play around with over here. So as I was saying, you can now be a Lone Ranger, but still have someone who's pretty intelligent. But you also got to check each other's works when you're doing that. One of the things I like to use AI for is documenting my code. So I'm going to take a look at this code over here. I'm going to take about 30 seconds for everyone watching to kind of take a look at what this code is doing over here and think about, what is it really doing? What is this thing? It's looking for span, eggs and span. Oh, span. Okay. It's looking for an element from the D. I think, oh, there's a password. I'm pretty sure that's a password over here, and a button that's doing something over here. If I'm brand new on the project, it would be hard for me to kind of figure out what this thing is doing. So maybe I just go and ask the AI to explain it. So let's go take a look at this. Here's our code, and it's in code, and it's using Codium, and it's basically just explained what this thing is doing. It's setting up a driver. It looks like it's filling in email and password with hard-coded values. That's something maybe we should not be doing with code, at least not in production. And I don't test in production. I don't recommend it. But the number one thing to throw in there is that please don't have your username and password log you into production. The same one that's in testing in the QA environment. That's a bad thing. However, some people are of different opinions whether it's okay that everybody knows the password is password in the QA environment, and it doesn't even match that the process there. Let me get this going on. We'll move on. The other thing is I want to kind of get this to explain what the heck is it going on here. It actually kind of changed up the code, but this isn't quite explaining me what is actually going on here. It did some coding. So I'm going to say, you know what? I'm not crazy about this. I'm going to reject all this because it's not really what I want to do. So I'm going to go and reject that, and we're going to try something else. We're going to go into Codium, and then we're going to ask it to kind of update this code to be a little bit more descriptive. And we can see it's changed the objects. It's to the email field, password field, submit button. Clearly, this is the automation of the hello world of test automation. It's logging in. That's all it's really doing. I also want to use the Codium to go and comment this stuff. This is what drives me crazy. Years and years of previous developers, there's an old joke that says, document your code like the next guy who's going to look at it as a serial killer who knows where you live. That's always been my favorite thing to do there. Another thing I'm going to do over here is going to go into the refactor and actually ask it to do something custom. I want to have a description header put in there. And I could just talk to the AI and say, put in a descriptive header out there, and boom, I've got the header in there. This comes in really handy when you have a big, long library and you don't have time to document the whole thing. Let the AI go through it and do it. Okay, that's our first little demo over there. I hope you enjoyed that. And that's, again, for our developers. So we have fixed our code over here. So I've asked the AI to document it. I've asked it to improve readability by changing the variables. But the one thing you always have to check, like I said, you got to check for the iron pyrite in there. Is this really well done? And in fact, there is one thing that's kind of throwing us off over here, is that this locator out here it's got a div, another div at two different indexes, a list over here, and it's got a link. And if any of these locations ever change for the welcome message that it's looking for, this is going to fail. And then you have to do your maintenance and go back to your page object model and go update that. And of course, automation projects, they get bigger. They have more and more test cases that expand. And you may end up spending a lot more time doing the maintenance to update the page object model. And that can be a kind of a challenge. So for the next part of this, we'll be talking a little bit about a software testing tool, website. We'll be using the Shady Meadows Bed and Breakfast. This is the Restful Booker is known. It is from the Ministry of Test out in London. So there are cool guys out there. This is the URL, of course. It's automationandtesting.online, none of which has the same names, but goes this one over here. It is also known as Shady Meadows Bed and Breakfast. It is a registration site, which I really love because, one, you can log in as an admin. And by the way, the user credentials are admin and password. Shh, don't tell anyone. Very secure. You can get to that by adding a pound admin, or you can go to the front page and click on the admin site. And you can test your skills on automation with this by interacting with all sorts of different elements. We've got drop-down lists. We've got checkboxes. Somewhere there's a radio button I'm pretty sure that I'm not seeing, but I'm sure it's there. And you can create new rooms. Always by default, there's a room 101. And then as a guest, you can log in and go and rent this room, room 237, the most haunted room in the Overlook Hotel from Stephen King. We'll be there for 4 nights and spending £168 because they moved the whole hotel to London. And they're accepting pounds, and I'm just kidding about they didn't do that, but it is a cool thing to go and validate. And I can go in as a guest and put in my name, my email, my address, my phone number, and go book this. And the really cool thing is every 10 minutes, this whole thing resets. So you can this will exist for about 10 minutes. Your test cases should be taking seconds or up to a minute or something like that to complete. So you can actually create test cases on how to do that. You can click on the home page as a customer, and you can click on admin panel. And let's say all I want to do is click on the Let's Hack button. There it is. Let's Hack is right there. It's very simple. We just have to go and click on it. And we're going to be talking now a little bit more about how to click on that Let's Hack button with different page natural language processing tools. And there's at least 4 of them out there, and they basically say you don't have to learn code. All you need to do is type in plain text, enter some data into a field. You can do that in Test Sigma. Over here, we got AI codeless testing, which is, if I remember correctly, actually it's QTP, UFT, if you guys are familiar with that. It's a layer on top of that can do this. Check our profile, type this into a field. And for this demo, I'm going to do a compare of 2 different tools. There's Context QA, where you can navigate to someplace and click on Let's Hack over here, and Test Rigger, which will also do exactly the same thing. They can click Let's Hack and check the page contains some text on there. If you're afraid of codeless, don't be. I will guarantee you in all these tests, they always talk about no code tools. Not really a thing. There is only, as far as I know, there's only low code tools, which means 80 to 90% of what you want to do is doable in plain English. If you want to click add to cart, you can do it. Select something from a list, enter something to a field, navigate to a URL, and validate. You can say those in plain English, and all 4 of these tools can do it. It doesn't cover everything. It's a Pareto principle, right? 80% of what you want to do in automation can be done with those 4 steps. And then there's 20% that maybe the tool has the capability of doing what you want. As Kristin mentioned, API testing is also quick and fast, and it's something that you want to add in there. All these tools do API testing as well. We won't get too deep into that, but it's in there. But the point of this is that all of these also have a coding aspect behind it. So if there's something that isn't out there yet, you could write it yourself in the programming language of these tools, and then implement it and let it go and chug away. And it's not that difficult because of AI. AI, you can ask it, please tell me when a player for a video is 20% or 60% through. You can write that in JavaScript. You don't have to wait for the development team of the company to create something like that. You can do it on your own. So we're going to click on Let's Hack, right? Except there's one problem. Those darn developers are always changing something behind the scenes. It's not Let's Hack anymore. It's Let Me Hack. What is going to happen here? Well, let's take a look at how Context QA handles this. There's using an AI agent to go and click on Let's Hack. I've told it to go run. That element does not exist on that page anymore. And it's going over to the RESTful Booker. It's looking to click on Let's Hack, and it finds that Let Me Hack is on the screen. There is no actual element called Let's Hack. And check it out over here. It says the AI goes, I clicked on the Let Me Hack button, and it figured it out and passed the test case and says, hey, I'm good to go. I have figured out that there is an element I'm looking for, and the next page I'm looking is to go and log in. And we can see that it's updated the test, even though behind the scenes it still says click Let's Hack. It's still going to show you it'll now be running with that new code. That's not just the only tool out there. Let's go and see how Test Rigger does this as well. Same thing. I've got a test case over here going into Shady Meadows, saying go click on Let's Hack over here. And I know that my last test failed because, hey, couldn't find the element, but I turned on a feature that said, hey, go and find this if it does not exist. There's our description of the failure, saying, hey, I couldn't find it. And I'm pointing out that that is the element that is seen, Let Me Hack, not Let's Hack. Do I have to go and update a page object model to do this? Well, let's give it a run over here, take a look and see our screen captures as they kick in. This is running a virtual machine in the cloud, and this is running on Linux, but it could also run on Windows and Mac as well, and test 4 different combinations of browsers at the same time. This is kind of cool. It's actually already passed because I can see the green button over here, and this gave me a yellow indication saying, hey, I kind of cheated. I used this AI to tell me what was going on. I'm going to look at the extra info and check this out. The AI says, I'm going to generate a new script that says click Let Me Hack, because Let's Hack isn't there, but it did find a button that is close to what the description is, and it said, I'm going to go change that. You know, with a little head over there, the robot head says, hey, by the way, there's 2 different versions of this. I changed it from Let's Hack to Let Me Hack, and there's even version control in there to go and roll it back to the original version if I decide, no, the AI should not have done that. That is the one thing I see in AI self-healing, is that it tries to be very, very optimistic as to what it's doing. So you do also have to review the rules and say, hey, you know what? Maybe the documentation that we have, the requirements, need to be updated so that it matches what it says here. Or did somebody put in something that isn't supposed to be in there? They made some sort of change, and it's going to get reverted back in the very next release because somebody points it out and says, hey, how come you did that? But either way, AI tools do a really good job of finding what's out there and identifying it with screen captures and videos. Both of these tools do both of that. So I'm going to pause over here. There's actually a question coming in here. It says, does it tell you what it changed to? Are there logs that will tell it tell you like, hey, this element is this, and now it is something different. Both tools actually do that. This one, Test Rigger, I'll tell you, is kind of unique in the field because it actually has no page object model. It tries to reduce all the maintenance on that by eliminating it. The way it does it is that it looks at it like with fresh eyes. Every time there's a new release, it says, I want to try and find that object. Same thing with Context QA. It will actually give you a description. Let me see if I have it up. I don't have the live one up, but I can come back to that. But I can tell you that yes, it also will give you a list. It may have been in the previous video. Let me take a look at my previous. Let's go back one. I'm gonna go jump to the end because I think at the very end. This ain't the one that's got that image in it, but I'm gonna go. Let me just go back 1 second over here, see if I can find it. That's what I get for answering questions live. Yeah, Louisa, the answer to the question is yes. Both of these tools will tell you what changed and you can revert back to it. So I hope that answers your question. And if I see the answer, if I see it, I will point it out because I've seen some of this before. All right, a little bit more about coding, about plain English. The big question that comes around is, what if the object that I'm working with completely changes? And there's two different ways that an object itself, it can change. One is that whatever the description is, like the class or the type itself, has changed to something else in the attributes. Or, thank you, Louisa, thumbs up, good. I'm glad I have to carry you there. Or the other thing that could change is the actual type of the object could change from, let's say in this case, a link to a search button. And in this case, on our playground over here, the search button is identical. It looks physically identical to the users out there. If I'm doing a coding style, I would be adding some clever coding and saying, hey, let's try ignoring any line breaks. Let's try case insensitivity. Let's do a substring match. Just look for a search. And obviously, if I do search, search is a lowercase over here, but in the text, it's capital. You can certainly find it based on search. Click search, find it by the ID, find it by the text that's in the object itself. And then in this case, the class doesn't even exist anymore. And then we also got some garbage over here. It's a pre-processed ID. This is probably going to change every single time. Nothing we want to use to do that. But also, there's data QA in here. The developers have had an agreement with the QA department saying, this will always identify that search button over there. We are never going to change that attribute. We may mess with these guys and these guys and these guys, but if you want to work with this, that will work out fine. So coding-wise, you can you're going to end up trying to write something a little bit clever in order to add in automatic code healing, object healing on that. And I've done it. I did it in freaking BASIC. It's a bit of a challenge. It's kind of cool. And it was a challenge, but today you've got AI. Any one of those AI things can go down there and now produce what you need to do. And in fact, here's one out of a Selenium approach. There's a Selenium approach. Here's some code. If I want to go and click on an element, but I can't find it with this XPath because this is a anchor, and I'm going to go and translate any. I'm looking for any class that has this the text put in. I said, let me hack is in here. What if I were to get rid of the thing over there and just replace all the spaces with dashes and normal and lowercase this whole thing? There's a real good chance I could still find that element if the class changes. And over here, I'm using normalized space to basically eliminate any backslashes, ends, new line characters and stuff like that. And then I've got a try catch over here that's going through it and saying, hey, if I can't find this element the way I initially wrote it in this XPath, let's try it in a different way. Let's try, instead of a link, anchor. Let's try a button over here. Exact same thing. Look for any classes that have also match let me hack with dashes or underscores, whatever it is that's in your approach. And you can even do, it's a little too long to show on this slide, but you could actually do uppercase, lowercase matches. And that means putting the entire alphabet up there. Real quick click, it's a suggestion, put it into a variable and then reference the variable, the uppercase and lowercase variables on that. And then if neither one of these things, if this does work and it says, hey, yeah, I found this object, cool, go click on it. If it doesn't, well, send out some information somewhere that says, hey, I couldn't find this. Good tip over here. Don't say I couldn't find the element. Say I couldn't find the element named the search term, whatever I passed it in. The search term came over here. I couldn't find the element. Let me hack. I couldn't find the element. Add to cart. That is a really good divider between a newbie automation engineer and an expert one, and something I learned. Like I said, 25 years. I learned it 24 years, 11 months ago. To be descriptive. And just going back, remember just a few minutes ago, I showed you that demo where the AI, it was giving all sorts of interesting additional information, and we're going to see a little bit more of that in just a moment. Why build in self-healing? Well, because a quick story, there was a project I worked on where they changed the entire underlying class. They changed it from vanilla HTML to React. Every single element I had went from link to a button. And we had 100 test cases, and 99 of them were failing. The only one that was working was the login. Usually would take us about 2 hours to get through all 100 test cases. We ran them in sequence. We didn't have parallel at that time. Tells you how far back this was. And our change of the repository, we estimated would probably take about 2 days. It was just me and another coworker, and he was just about in tears saying, we're not going to get this in 2 hours. And I said, let me come up with an idea. And I basically came up with the code you just saw on the previous slide. Was let's go, and if we get a link, let's refactor it into a button and see if you can find it and click it. In that case, those 3-4 lines of code, 10, whatever we had over there, it turned out to be, it got 94 of our test cases running and passing. That left 6 left to go. And of those 6, 4 of them were elements that trick just did not work, but that was an easy fix. 4 elements we fixed up in the repository. That took about 30 minutes, and that left 2 test cases left over, and they were bugs, which was, we detected 1 or 2 bugs every release anyway, so we were still on target, and it took us only 2 hours to get through it. So having self-healing objects built into your framework, into your tool, it's absolutely, I'd say, a necessity. But what if you didn't need to have CSS or XPath or a page object model or even code? Well, we were already kind of talking about that. Let me just tell you a little bit about the curse of code density. This is one of the things that why I've started to go into codeless or low-code automation. Here's Java to go and click on the Let Me Hack button over here. It would take 7 lines of code and 283 characters. That's time you have to type in there. In Python, it would have been 6 lines of code, 222 characters. If I'm looking at Cypress, it's 3 lines of code, 69 characters there. That's getting better. Less time writing code, more time executing it, and more time for analysis and context QA. Using an AI agent, click the Let Me Hack button. It will go and find it. That's 34 characters. And if I did it in Test Rigger, click Let Me Hack, will go and find it automatically. And so it's just 1 line. The less code you have to write, the more time you have to run and analyze. So I'm starting to see that whole thing. Although it is starting to change now because we have Copilot out there, as we just saw, doing all sorts of stuff, writing the code for us and writing it fairly accurately, 80, 90, 95%. It gets smarter every single time that we're looking at it. So it's not saying that Java isn't the best way or JavaScript. You now can actually write the code faster with an AI and looking to see how much better you can make your code. Next thing is you can actually generate test cases from generative AI. Here is context QA, and it's going to essentially say it can create positive or negative test cases. You could say, hey, if I give it bad credentials, will it log in? Will it not log in? Can I verify that? There is a description over there. We'll talk about that in a moment. It's actually pretty good about figuring out what you might want to do, but keep in mind it's always best to have an AI prompt to do this. But even just generating without the AI prompt, I think it's pretty smart on that. What I don't recommend is saying go and just test this site. You should have a description of what the site is, how it works, and what you expect out of it. AI just simply can't read your mind and know without having the requirements that it has. And most of these AI tools can plug into a requirements tracking tool. So it can actually read, here's what we expect, and let's go execute it based on what we see. You update the requirements. The test cases can update themselves to match whatever the current requirements is that the BA put in there. It is showing over here that it has created some test cases, logging with an empty username and password, entering special characters into the username and password. It can generate that automatically. And I'm going to go on to our next one. There's Test Rigger. We're going to do the exact same thing over here by generating test cases based on AI. You can do 5 to 200 test cases out of that. You have the feature description. And as I said, you don't want to have this as your AI description. Test this site. It's not fantastic. You want to have something a little bit more descriptive, like, well, this is the Shady Meadows landing page where guests can reserve rooms. And if you put in the admin using the word login, you can actually log in with the credentials, and you should be able to create new rooms with random number, random dollar amount. This gives the AI a much better description on that. Lisa has another question. Do you know if it works with a Flutter-based website? I don't know if Context QA works on a Flutter-based website, but Test Rigger does work on it. I can't mention the company name. I don't know if we've signed with them, but yes, I've actually done it with Flutter. And yes, I know the question. So what Luisa is saying, by the way, if I read between the lines, what if you got a web page that doesn't have no objects at all on your page? Well, at that point, you can do a couple of things. One, you can actually insert pictures or diagrams of this and have it identify the information like that. You could also say, click on the add to cart button using AI. You can also say, click on the AI button using OCR, optical character recognition. There's kind of a trade-off on the speed on that. However, in the company that I'm talking about, like I said, can't say their name, it was only the first 10% of the website. It was a survey that it was going through. The survey is entirely Flutter, but the rest of the site, once you got past that, it's like, okay, let's get some information. It was like just straight up React. So they were rather happy I was able to kind of show that off. It's a great question. And Luisa, if you want to chat, look me up on LinkedIn, please reach out. I'd be more than happy to go find, if you've got a public Flutter site, I could do a live demo of that. Let me move on there. Great question. Thank you very much on the question there, Luisa. So over here, I've generated 5 test cases based on the description, and it's going through and essentially opening them up, the pages. This does run in parallel. Both Context QA and the Test Rigger both run their test cases in parallel. People ask me, like, well, what's the cost on this? I'm like, the simplest way I could say is the faster you want your results, the more parallel servers you want to purchase. And that's all I know about how Test Rigger. I don't want to talk about costs or anything like that. I don't know the exact costs on Context QA, but let's get back over on this. This is actually generating, the AI is figuring out how to do this, and In this case, it's actually it invented its own credentials. It said, here's the admin, but it didn't actually use it guessed what the admin password was. Admin 123 won't get it in, so it will actually fail that test. But that's easy enough to fix. This one's checking to see if the B&B booking management is on there. Again, AI, sometimes it's brilliant, sometimes it's smarter than a box of rocks. So it's not the tool. It's really the AI and how much information is given to it as it's training. But over here, this one's actually working really well. It said, let me go click on that let me hack, all right? And now I am going to go and enter in the login. And by the way, I gave it the username and password immediately. And it went, okay, I'm just going to say login. I'm going to guess at it. It's just one word, login. It's nothing more than that. It's saying I'm going to put an admin and password in there and click on login. I didn't write any of this. This is the AI kind of generating it out. And if I click on login, it comes back and says, hey, I'm able to interact with this. And it actually gets to the part of the site where it is showing us the credentials, the rooms where it can check in. And it's suddenly begin to enter in information into there to select radio buttons and different stuff. Again, like I said, the AI is kind of, it's not always the most brilliant thing, but the cool thing is that it's easy to edit. It's easy to change and fix up. You don't have to go through writing all that extra code to support all these things. And it works out fairly well. And I got another awesome from Lisa. Thank you so much, Lisa. All right, let's go back here. So, how to train your AI. So in this case, I want to check if a home page is visible. This is in Test Rigger. That's the way you can write it. It's check home page is visible. It's the link that's on there. I would also want to check that the page contains a house using AI, and also check the single is available. Bad slide. This is supposed to be 4 lines, so my apologies on that. And then also I want to check the page contains a bed and a chair. Let me just jump back over to our link over here. This is our RESTful Booker, and we are looking for maybe a chair and a bed in there. And I also want to look for maybe a house on this page. So that's our live page, and I want to populate that stuff. Let me go back to our PowerPoint over here, and let's get this guy running. So first of all, I'm going to go click on the home page. That's what I want to do. I want to verify that we have house on the page visually, and we also want to verify that there's a single room that's available out there. And if I added more, you could actually see these. Like I said, it sticks around for 10 minutes. And then this is me writing those lines. Check if single is visible, and using AI to check that there is a house on the page and that contains a bed and a chair. The single is a standard validation. You should see that the single text is on the page. It's popped into our virtual machine up in the cloud, and it is chugging away. And what do we get? We get validation. And well, it's actually saying that it checked the house homepage is visible. It wants to click on the home page. And I'm hoping that me switching probably, I paused the video. Oh, I'm sorry. It goes and scrolls down and is now checking to see if that house is on there. And we can go through. Yep, it highlights and says, hey, home page was on that page. It was the only element that had the word homepage on it, so it highlighted that. And then the second thing was to check it contains house. And by the way, it combined it all. So you can see up here what the AI says. The statement contains a house is true. Why? The visual information in the screenshot has an image of a house on the top of the page, which matches the context of bed and breakfast described in the page source. I didn't write any of that. This is the AI doing it. The old farmhouse is also referenced in there, so it also supports that there should be a presence of a house. And then the second half was the visual evidence shows that a room with a bed and chair is visible in the image. It mentions that all the rooms have comfortable beds, but it's not specifically mentioning chairs. However, the visual evidence shows that there is a bed and a chair on that page. Oh my gosh. This is the level of detail that I've been trying for so many years to try to put into my automation test cases, and now AI basically does it for you. And it is amazing. And it did it in 21 seconds. It all passed, so I'm happy with all of that. Okay. And we'll go back over here. Couple things you can do with some AI stuff. This is one I kind of discovered. I wanted to write a test rigger line that clicks a button named add to cart. Comes back and says click add to cart. Actually, that's actually the right syntax. That's cool. But what is it? Is it Java, JavaScript, Python? Well, actually, it's test rigger's own thing. So I'm chatting with it now and saying, okay, can you add test rigger as the programming language when you're displaying these results? Absolutely. There it is. This is the format. This is the new language test rigger right over there, which is kind of cool. Our last little demo over here is the one that I like the best. I'm going over to Claude, and basically, let's say in our requirements document, it says populate the field with the first name being Paul, the last name being Grossman, the email being this, the company is that, and our job title being Automation Guru. You could go over to test rigger and have, or I should say, I should go over to Claude or other tools and train them on how that looks and have it write it for you. So let's go and do that. Here's our actual conference you all are attending right now. And that is where I want to put in my last name, my first name, the company, the job title, and my email address. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to paste in that text. Now, the AI may not be smart enough to translate that. So I'm going to change that into comments so I know exactly what's going on. Best thing is also document your test cases so it has that. And I'm going to paste this in over at Claude and say, hey, Claude, can you translate this into something that test rigger would identify? Now, the thing is, Claude doesn't really know much about test rigger. It's taking a wild guess at what the syntax might be, and it may not be accurate. As I say, AI is only as smart as what you trained it. I'm going to go and paste this in there. I noticed that navigate to actually isn't a test, a syntax that we use. So how am I going to train it? I'm going to tell it, hey, go learn the syntax of test rigger. And we're going to do this. We're going to go over to the documentation of test rigger. I'm going to go and click on the basic commands. I'm going to copy all of this. How much farther should I go? Halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, all the way through? Yeah, all the way sounds good. I'm going to copy all this and then go and paste it at Claude and click the submit. And it's going to come back and say, all right, yeah, I'm learning all this. Here's the syntax I can create. This is what the guide kind of looks like. This is how you can do everything. I've learned a few new things. And now I wanted to go back and say, okay, do this again. Convert the text that I gave you that came out of a document and format it in test riggers based on what you just learned. Is it smart? Does it do it? It actually changes the validations. Let's check that page, which is great. But the navigation is still wrong. So I have to kind of tweak it and say, okay, listen, specifically open URL is what you use for this. And check it out. Open URL is now the text that's being used. Now, when I initially grabbed this formatted text, initially it came back with 3 different errors. One, it didn't like the way it was doing validations. It didn't like the way it was navigating. So I'm going to go and copy this over and paste this in. And now we've got the open URL. I'm going to hit add and run. Does it come back with errors? No, it says, hey, I'm going to go run that test. Pretty cool. Didn't have to write any of that. It's actually using AI to convert the English of a requirements document into what test rigger is doing. And by the way, it has its own feature. It could actually do this itself. Either way, you can actually tell it, hey, can you interpret this, whatever it is? Which is kind of cool. I don't have a demo for that at the moment, but we'll let this chug along. And it did a little AI thing that said reserve your spot. I didn't quite see that. It's reserve your spot now. I went, oh, the AI goes, okay, I found something close rather than reserve your spot. And it also went through, and this is in Test Rigger over here. This is the screen capture. It populated my first name, my last name, the company, my fake company over there, Candy Mapper. It is a testing site if you want to play around. There's all sorts of sites out there that you can play around. Please come to candymapper.net or candymapper.com. One is based on the background is GoDaddy. So it simulates a actual e-commerce site. And if you don't like GoDaddy, you like the Wix better, go to candymapper.net. It's exactly the same test site, but it is different. It's different behind the scenes stuff. So you can actually try and click different elements with different descriptions behind it and see if it actually works without having to go and update a page object model. Isn't that cool? Yeah, it's cool. All right, let me go on. I believe this is basically the end of the tips and the tricks of AI with low-code platforms and also some stuff for developers. This is a little bit of where I'm at on X at Dark Arts Wizard. Find the Dark Arts Wizard anywhere you can find it, and I'm more than happy to do that. And I got about 10 minutes left according to my clock, maybe. And let me take a look and see any other questions. Lisa gave me the awesome, thank you very much. I got Tao Sif over there. He's saying, hey, everyone. Hey, Tao Sif, nice to see you. At this point, if there's any questions, shoot those into the conversation over there. And at this point, we'll talk with Larry. And if you have any questions.
Brilliant. As always, brilliant. I was just glued there, just, watching you go through all these low code stuff. But I think we need to tell you, I'm old school. I love writing code. So
there's room for you. There's room for you. Like I said, there's JavaScript. We're not trying to get rid of all of our automation engineers.
But it makes life easier, to be honest. It makes life easier and get things done a lot faster, especially the whole concept of the whole AI element of it, where it can do that. It can do things. So that's really really good. I think what advice, I know I've asked this, but everybody using Gen AI to do all kind of weird and wonderful stuff now. But what kind of advice, do you give the new ones coming into the environment?
The advice for the new ones. Well, the major thing is that the most difficult thing doing an automation with AI is actually trying to get a good AI descriptive an AI prompt. And sometimes we just can't do it mentally ourselves. We're like, well, what am I going to do? You can actually ask almost any one of your AIs to generate a prompt to test login. The login on this. Let me do that, and it comes up with the prompts that says here, follow this. This is what I expect to do, and then these can be used to determine, how am I going to do it? It's giving really small ones. You can actually have it be a little bit more descriptive. You can, some of these will go out to a website. You can give it the website of the RESTful Booker website, and it'll go and try and figure out a little bit more about the website. How about testing bestbuy.com? And let's see what it says about that. It's looking at valid logins, successful direction to a user. Usually it should come back and say, hey, how about searching for products? Because it's only talking about logins, because I specifically said, how do I test the login functionality? And so it's getting very wordy on this. But
it's really cool. So basically, the AI teaching how to explain it. The AI is teaching you how to write a good prompt. to
Yes.
find what is actually one to another AI. So that's very interesting. Yeah. So how can I ask you a question? Well, you can ask me a question by X, Y, and Z, and then you can ask me the actual question. That's good.
You can also tell these things. Pretend you're a QA automation engineer. Pretend you're an SDET, and solve this for me. Also, if you're looking for creating the requirements, you can ask it. Pretend you're a BA for this website and create some requirements based on what's there. I don't know if anyone's ever had this situation where you get into a testing thing and they're like, well, the developers create this, but we don't have any requirements. They're just, the CEO comes over to the water cooler and kind of says, I'd like to see if this can be done, but nobody's documenting the requirements to see if it's actually following something. You could actually use the AI to go, oh, can you write up some requirements that you think this actually fits and reverse engineer it? Hopefully nobody's doing that, but it's happened to be more than once on a project.
I have a user asking a question, Paul, not cutting. I have a user asking a question. I want to know, what AI model does Test Rigger use? If it's Claude or
it's ChatGPT. It's ChatGPT, but we are exploring other models out there. So I do know that it's ChatGPT. We also there are other tools out there that I saw asked to validate that there were 3 people in a kitchen, and it said, like I said, it was a different tool that they were doing, and it said this failed because you're expecting 3 people in the kitchen, and there were only 3 people in the kitchen. So the smarter ones go and double check and say, does that make sense? And then it tests either against itself or another AI and goes, no, it passes. It doesn't fail. Because it said literally there's 3 people in that kitchen. That's a pass. So that's the important thing on keep an eye out for AI tools that I've seen out there in the last 6 months. Something was doing that.
Okay, cool. I mean, and thank you, Paul. I mean, for this whole tips and tricks, and especially where you integrated AI into low code, and it's very good and interesting as well. And before we run off and wrap up, is there anything you want to say to all our beautiful people out there?
Buy our book. That's the thing.
I like that.
Also, check out Kristin's book as well. It's the Complete Software Tester out there. That's man. Is there something else I can say? Keep exploring? Don't be afraid of AI. Check it out. It's a brand new tool, and it's just the way that you need to play with it and learn on what it's how good it is. I always also look at it as it's like running a race, and you're starting 80% to the finish line. The last 20%, just double check it. Maybe you get through all the way. Maybe you also have to look at it and say, okay, this thing didn't quite figure out what I really wanted to do. And cool. I've got hey, Party Wolf. How are you doing, Party? I love that. That's a fun person. That's going to be a fun person. And you invite them to a party, Party Wolf shows up. I don't know if that's the real name, but if it is, hey, props to your parents, man.
Yeah, I mean,
whoever you are.
It's really cool. Thanks for taking the time to come and do this, and as everything else, it's always good chatting with you as we co-inhabit with each other. So it's always good to do that. And this is us wrapping up for this first test meetup for the year, and look out for the other one. And who knows, you might come, it might be you. If you want to, and also if you know that you have something that you want to share, you can also reach out to test.io, and you can come on and be a Paul or be a Kristin, and share that knowledge that you have with everybody else out there. So thank you so much, Paul, for you being here, and thank you for everybody wherever in the world you are. And I would say again, good morning, good afternoon, and good night to everyone, because it's all that differently. And so from me, Larry, test automation architect, mentor, and co-author of that beautiful book with Paul, it was good having you all, and thank you.
And thank you for your help on this book, Larry. I couldn't have done it without. And by the way, thank you to Testomat.io for having us do this each month. It's been continuing on for. Have we been doing this for what, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, that's about
Something
3
like
years now. So yeah.
3 years. So if you like us, if you want to see Larry or me, come on back, like you said, every other month. Thank you so much, Larry. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. So thank you, Paul.
Cheers.
Madayo, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity again to to have these beautiful speakers share some knowledge with everybody. So from me and Madayo, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night wherever you are. Thank you.